دخلات تكالمات. والقضيه كنا شفناها حتى البارح، الناس كياخذوا كريدي باش يديروا الشورت، حيت باش كدير الشورت كتسمى بحال كتاخذ كريدي، اوكي، وكدير شورت ولا كدير لونغ. هذاك تو ماتش هايب ما بقاش، اوكي، تكالمات القضيه. لا لا لا، ها هو هذه هبطات. اللونغ تقريبا الليكويديشن اللي تليكويدا هو 456.1، والشورت حتى هو فين هو الشورت؟ هو الشورت حتى هو 151، اوكي، 249 هنا، اوكي. دونك لونغ والشورت بجوجهم تليكويداو. البيتكوين راجع شي شويه كيف كان، ولكن في لي بلاتفورم كاملين حتى كتشوف هنا الاكسشينجز كاملين، باينانس، باي بيت، سميتها الهايبر ليكويد، كلشي كلشي كانت ليكويديشن كبيره. علاش؟ لانه هادشي اللي قلت لكم، الناس كيتسناو واحد اخر يجي يمشي ياخذ فلوسه، وجاو بغا ياخذوا له عاوتاني فلوسه الاخرين، اوكي. هذا الخبر هذا حتى هو ما عرفناش واش فري ولا ماشي فري. ابارنتلي فري، لان شفتها في انستغرام، ومشيت درتها جوجليتها هنا في تويتر، لقيتها كاينه حتى في تويتر. دونك تقدر تكون الجوفرمنت، ولكن ما يمكنش هادشي كيتكونتراديا هادشي، العكس ما كيقول ترامب. ترامب قال لك نيفر سيل يو بيتكوين، وما يمكنش الجوفرمنت ديال ترامب، وترامب باقي هو البريزيدون، ما يمكنش البيتكوين يتباع، مستحيل. لان حتى واحد ما يقدر يفورسي الدوله مثلا باش تبيع البيتكوين، ولكن سميتو البريزيدون يقدر يدير هذه القضيه، ولكن واش دارها ولا لا ما يمكنش. علاش ترانسفيراو الفلوس للبلاتفورم؟ حيت نورمالمون الفلوس، هاد الفلوس هادو، هاد البيتكوين هذا كيكون فيه واليت، كولد واليت. علاش كتجيبو نتايا الهارد واليت؟ علاش كتجيبو نورمالمون باش تبيعو؟ لان علاش تجيبو باش يتفجج؟ ما كنجيبوش باش يتفجج، اوكي، ضرب ضريبه في عين الدياب، اوكي، راك كتجيبو باش تبيعو. الا كان هذا خبر صحيح، هذه راه خايبه بزاف. 667 حبه ديال البيتكوين worth of 74 مليون دولار، وهذه كاتاستروف. الا فات دارها ترامب غتسمى كاتاستروف، اوكي. انا ما نظنش، ما يمكنش، مستحيل، ولكن حتى شي حاجه ما يمكنش، فهمتي؟ يقدر يديرها ويدوز. دي جي تونا، thank you very much Mr. DJ. اوكي، باينانس از نون ستوب دروبين. عاوتاني باينانس كيدير هادشي، ما عرفتش كيديرها بالعاني ولا انا ما كنفهمش علاش كيديرها، مي باينانس كيدامبي بزاف ديال البي تي سي، هو اللي كيشارك في هذا الكراش كامل، اوكي. هاد القضيه شفناها بزاف المرات، ومازال كنشوفوا فيها. ما عرفتش شنو هو الهدف ديالو باينانس، ولكن باينانس كيدير هاد القضيه بزاف، اوكي. بلاك راك عاوتاني از ديبوزيتين 93,000 ايثيريوم و 700 بي تي سي تقريبا، ب 77 مليون دولار. حطوها في كون بيس برايم. اشنو غيديروا بها؟ ما عرفناش واش غيديروا بها، واش غيبيعوا ولا لا حتى هما، وي دون نو. هوبفلي ما يبيعوش، لان الا باعوا غادي نطيحوا عاوتاني اكثر من 107 و 109، غنطيحوا حتى ل 100. اوكي، كنتمنى على الله يكون خير. هاد القضيه عجبتني، قال هذا نقدر انا نتفق معها. ما عرفتش واش تقدروا تتفقوا معها نتوما، بغيت نعرف الراي ديالكم. جيروم باول از لايف ناو. اوه شيت، انا نسيت، كنت باغي نقول لكم خصنا نتفرجوا في جيروم باول، خاصنا نشوفوه. لا خصنا نشوفوا جيروم باول، خاصنا نشوفوا جيروم باول. هاد القضيه هي ما قلتهاش لكم. هو كيهضر والله الا هو بدا. شيت، sorry, thank you very much for reminding me. معلم برافو عليك.
This challenge was evident in the dispersion of did. Research and experience tell us that asset purchases affected alongside many of your past recipients, including
has also earned him the respect of policymakers, economists, and business leaders worldwide. His work, particularly in the areas of monetary policy, financial regulation, and economic resilience, absolutely align with the ideals of the Adam Smith Award. He has consistently applied foundational economic principles to address real-world challenges, upholding the Federal Reserve's high standards of sound economic management and transparent policymaking in the process. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Chair Jerome Powell.
غنجاوب السي حمزه. عاود فكرني في هذا السؤال اللي كتبتي له مهم، اخر جاوبت عليه البارح. هذا السؤال اللي حطيتي واش حنايا في الاند اوف سايكل ولا لا، غنجاوبوا عليها. اوكي اوكي عطاوه جائزه. هذا راه اول مره غيجي لهاد نابل. نابل
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emily, and thanks to the National Association for Business Economics for the Adam Smith Award. It, for me, is an unexpected honor just to be mentioned alongside many of your past recipients, including particularly my predecessors, Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke. So thank you very much for this recognition. I will say, on a more personal note, I have greatly enjoyed my regular visits to your annual meeting and your conferences. It's really been my favorite venue all these years. It's a place. This is a place where we can talk about economic issues and not worry that someone's eyes might glaze over. I also appreciate the warm welcome I've always received here. And putting Fed staff aside for a minute, I can't think of a more lovable group of econ nerds anywhere. So thank you again for this prestigious award. And for the opportunity to speak to you here today. So, as we all know, monetary policy is more effective when the public understands what the Federal Reserve does and why. With that in mind, I hope to enhance understanding of one of the more arcane and technical aspects of monetary policy, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. A colleague recently compared this topic to a trip to the dentist. But I found that comparison somewhat unfair to dentists. So today I'll discuss the essential role that our balance sheet played during the pandemic, along with some lessons learned. I'll then review our ample reserves implementation framework and the progress we've made toward normalizing the size of our balance sheet. And I'll conclude with some brief remarks on the economic outlook. So, one of the primary purposes of a central bank is to provide the monetary foundation for the financial system and the broader economy. This foundation is made of central bank liabilities. On the Fed's balance sheet, the liability side of the ledger totaled $6.5 trillion as of October 8, and three categories account for roughly 95% of the total. First, Federal Reserve notes, that is physical currency, totaled $2.4 trillion. Second, reserves, funds held by depository institutions at Federal Reserve banks, totaled $3 trillion. These deposits allow commercial banks to make and receive payments and meet regulatory requirements. Reserves are the safest and most liquid asset in the financial system, and only the Fed can create them. The adequate provision of reserves is essential to the safety and soundness of our banking system, the resilience and efficiency of our payment system.
هادشي ماشي على التخفيف، هذا غير عرضوا عليه وغادي يهضر على الاقتصاد ان جنرال، ماشي وقيت تخفيف ولا باش ينقص الانترست ريت، ماشي دابا حتى ل 24 في الشهر و24 ولا 21 في هذا الشهر. هذا غير عرضوا عليه هاد المنظمه هادي نابي، هادي اول مره عرضوا عليه وجاو عطاوه الجائزه وغادي يهضر على الاقتصاد ان جنرال. اوكي، ولكن الكلام ديالو هو ديما الكلام ديالو اي حاجه كيقول كتاثر على الاقتصاد وكتاثر على كل شيء، ولكن اليوم ماشي وقت القرارات، ماشي وقت الفوت ديال الانترست ريت، غنسى هذا القديم، ما غاديش طرا اليوم.
Ultimately the stability of our economy. Third is the Treasury General Account, or TGA, currently at about $800 billion, which is essentially the checking account for the federal government. When the Treasury makes or receives payments, those flows affect dollar for dollar the supply of reserves or other liabilities in the system. The asset side of our ledger consists almost entirely of securities, including $4.2 trillion of U.S. Treasury securities and $2.1 trillion of government-guaranteed agency mortgage-backed securities, or MBS. When we add reserves to the system, we generally do so by purchasing Treasury securities in the open market and crediting the reserve accounts of the banks involved in the transaction with the seller. This process effectively transforms securities held by the public into reserves, but does not change the total amount of government liabilities held by the public. So, the Fed's balance sheet serves as a critical policy tool, especially when the policy rate is constrained by the effective lower bound, or ELB. When COVID-19 struck in March 2020, the economy came to a near standstill and financial markets seized up, threatening to transform a public health crisis into a severe, prolonged economic downturn. In response, we established a number of emergency liquidity facilities. Those programs, supported at the time by Congress and the administration, provided critical support to markets and were remarkably effective in restoring confidence and stability. At their peak in July 2020, loans from these facilities totaled just over 200 conditions stabilized. At the same time, the market for U.S. Treasury securities, normally the deepest and most liquid market in the world and the bedrock of the global financial system, was under extraordinary pressure and on the verge of collapse. We used large-scale purchases of securities to restore functionality to the Treasury market. Faced with unprecedented market dysfunction, the Fed purchased Treasury and agency securities at an extraordinary pace in March and April of 2020. These purchases supported the flow of credit to households and businesses and fostered more accommodative financial conditions to support the recovery of the economy when it ultimately came. This source of policy accommodation was particularly important as we had already lowered the federal funds rate close to zero and expected that it would remain there for some time. By June 2020, we slowed our purchase pace to a still substantial $120 billion per month. And in December of 2020, as the economic outlook remained highly uncertain, the FOMC said that we expected to maintain that pace of purchases until substantial further progress has been made toward the committee's maximum employment and price stability goals. That guidance provided assurance that the Fed would not prematurely withdraw support while the economic recovery remained fragile amid unprecedented conditions. And we maintained that pace of asset purchases through October 2021. By then, it had become apparent that elevated inflation was not likely to go away without a strong monetary response. At our meeting in November 2021, we announced a phase-out of our purchases, and at our next meeting in December, we doubled the pace of that taper and said that asset purchases would conclude by mid-March of 2022. Over the entire period of purchases, our securities holdings increased by $4.6 trillion. So, a number of observers have raised questions, fairly enough, about the size and composition of asset purchases during the pandemic recovery. Throughout 2020 and 21, the economy continued to face significant challenges as successive waves of COVID caused widespread disruption and loss. During that tumultuous period, we continued to purchase in order to avoid a sharp, unwelcome tightening of financial conditions at a time when the economy still appeared to be highly vulnerable. Our thinking was informed by recent episodes in which signals about reducing the balance sheet had triggered significant tightening in financial conditions, and we were thinking of the events of December 2018 as well as the 2013 taper tantrum. Regarding the composition of our purchases, some have questioned the inclusion of agency MBS purchases given the strong housing market during the pandemic recovery. Outside of purchases aimed specifically at market functioning, MBS purchases are primarily intended, like our purchases of Treasury securities, to ease broader financial conditions when the policy rate is constrained by the effective lower bound. The extent to which these MBS purchases disproportionately sustain smooth market functioning and to help foster accommodative financial independently of the size of our balance sheet. And that's important given large unpredictable swings in liquidity demand from the private sector and significant fluctuations in the autonomous factors affecting reserve supply, such as the TGA. This framework liabilities currently stand throughout our history. Of course, having negative net income has no bearing at all on our ability to conduct monetary policy or meet our financial obligations. If our regulation does not appear to have changed much since our September meeting 4 weeks ago, it should be understood as representing a range of potential outcomes whose probabilities evolve.
ما كاين حتى شي تغيير من نهار هضر اخر مره دوك داكشي ديال الانترست ريت مازال ما كاينش تغيير. وي ويل سي واتس كان هابن. باي ذا واي خصنا نمشي نشوفوا هنا شنو طاري. وكاين بغينا نشوفوا الاستجواب اللي غترى حيت كنشوفوا هنا في التلفزيون استجواب معاه.
New information informs our meeting-by-meeting approach to policy making.
96 هذه كانت 98
We'll set policy based on the evolution of the economic outlook and the balance of risks rather than